The microscope lens shattered into 1,000 glittering fragments across the laboratory floor. 3 months of meticulous research scattered like confetti in the aftermath of deliberate destruction. Emma Chen watched her dreams of the state science fair evaporate as quickly as the spilled chemical solutions that now pooled around her feet, mixing into an unrecognizable mess that bore no resemblance to the groundbreaking bacterial culture she had been nurturing since the beginning of the school year. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Standing over the wreckage with matching smirks were Tyler Morrison, Jake Sullivan, and Connor Walsh, 3 boys who had made it their personal mission to ensure that scholarship students understood their place in the carefully constructed hierarchy of Westfield Preparatory Academy. "Oops," Tyler said with mock innocence, brushing imaginary dust from his designer polo shirt. "Looks like your little science experiment had an accident. Maybe you should stick to subjects more suited to your background." His emphasis on the last word carried the weight of months of carefully crafted cruelty, each syllable designed to remind Emma that despite her academic achievements, she would never truly belong in their world of inherited privilege and automatic acceptance. Emma Chen had arrived at Westfield Preparatory Academy on a crisp September morning 8 months earlier, clutching the acceptance letter that represented everything her family had sacrificed to achieve. The scholarship notification had arrived. During the summer, a thick envelope that seemed almost too good to be true after years of her parents working multiple jobs to keep their small family afloat. Her father, Agent David Chen, spent long hours away from home on federal investigations that he couldn't discuss, while her mother, Dr. Sarah Chen, balanced her position as a resident at the county hospital with night shifts at a walk-in clinic to supplement their income. The scholarship to Westfield wasn't just an opportunity for Emma. It was validation that their sacrifices had meaning, that excellence could triumph over circumstance. Westfield Preparatory Academy occupied 45 acres of pristine Connecticut countryside, its brick buildings and manicured lawns serving as a testament to the power of old money and older traditions. Founded in 1887 by railroad magnates who wanted their children educated away from the influence of immigrant populations flooding into nearby cities, the school had maintained its exclusivity through careful admission practices and tuition rates that effectively screened out all but the wealthiest families. The student body of 800 came primarily from families whose names appeared on hospital wings, university buildings, and political donor lists. They drove luxury cars to school, spent spring breaks in European capitals, and discussed summer internships at companies their parents owned or directed. Emma's introduction to this world had been jarring from the very first day. While other students arrived in chauffeur-driven vehicles or behind the wheels of cars worth more than her family's annual income, she stepped off the public bus wearing a carefully pressed uniform her mother had purchased from the consignment shop that specialized in private school attire. Her backpack, while functional, bore no designer labels, and her shoes, though polished to a mirror shine, showed the subtle signs of being purchased for durability rather than fashion. These details, invisible to most adults, were immediately noted and cataloged by her peers, who possessed an almost supernatural ability to identify outsiders within their carefully protected ecosystem. The academic demands at Westfield were rigorous, designed to prepare students for admission to Ivy League universities where many of their parents had established legacy connections through generous donations and alumni involvement. Class sizes were small, with student-to-teacher ratios that ensured individual attention and support. The science facilities in particular were state-of-the-art, featuring equipment that most universities would envy and laboratory spaces that encouraged advanced research projects. For Emma, who had always excelled in scientific subjects despite attending underfunded public schools, the resources at Westfield represented an unprecedented opportunity to explore her passion for microbiology and biochemical research. Dr. Amanda Richardson, the advanced placement biology teacher, had immediately recognized Emma's potential during the first week of classes. While other students struggled with basic concepts that Emma had mastered through independent study and online courses, she demonstrated an intuitive understanding of complex biological processes that impressed even the veteran educator. Richardson had taught at Westfield for 15 years, watching countless privileged students coast through advanced courses with minimal effort, their futures secured through family connections rather than personal achievement. Emma's genuine enthusiasm for learning and her innovative approach to problem-solving stood out like a beacon in a sea of academic mediocrity, disguised by expensive tutoring and test preparation services. The science fair project that would ultimately become the catalyst for Emma's confrontation with Tyler and his associates had begun as a simple investigation into antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Emma had noticed that despite the advanced medical facilities available to Westfield families, there seemed to be an unusually high incidence of treatment-resistant infections among students who participated in the school's popular overseas service, TRIPS. Her initial hypothesis suggested that exposure to different bacterial strains in developing countries might be creating resistant populations that were then spreading through the close-knit school community upon the students' return. What started as a routine bacterial culture project evolved into something far more sophisticated as Emma's research uncovered patterns that defied conventional medical wisdom. Using samples collected from various surfaces around the school with proper permissions and safety protocols, she began identifying bacterial strains that shouldn't have existed in the Connecticut environment. Her cultures revealed the presence of microorganisms typically found in Southeast Asian countries, specifically in regions where several Westfield families had recently completed charitable missions or volunteer work. The implications were staggering. These families might be inadvertently serving as vectors for drug-resistant bacterial transmission, creating public health risks that extended far beyond the school's boundaries. Emma's research methodology was meticulous, incorporating advanced techniques she had learned through online courses from prestigious universities that offered free educational content. She maintained detailed logs of every experiment, photographed each stage of bacterial growth, and documented her findings with the precision of a professional researcher. The project consumed her free time, requiring her to arrive at school early and stay late to monitor her cultures and conduct additional tests. Dr. Richardson provided guidance and access to advanced equipment, but the intellectual heavy lifting was entirely Emma's own work, driven by a passion for discovery that transcended any grade or recognition. The breakthrough came in late November when Emma identified a previously unknown bacterial mutation that appeared to be specifically adapted to the antiseptic environments common in high-end medical facilities. This strain combined the virulence of tropical bacteria with resistance mechanisms that rendered most common antibiotics ineffective. The discovery had implications that reached far beyond a high school science project. It represented a genuine contribution to microbiological research that could influence public health policy and medical treatment protocols. Dr. Richardson immediately recognized the significance of Emma's work and began discussing the possibility of submitting the research to professional scientific journals after appropriate peer review and verification. Word of Emma's extraordinary project began to spread through Westfield's faculty, generating excitement among teachers who rarely encountered genuine scientific innovation among their students. The school's science department head, Dr. Marcus Webb, personally reviewed Emma's work and declared it the most sophisticated student research he had encountered in his 20-year career. Plans were made to showcase Emma's project at the state science fair, where it would compete against the Best high school research from across Connecticut. The prospect of a Westfield student winning the state competition generated considerable enthusiasm among faculty members who had grown accustomed to their privileged students producing competent but unexceptional work. However, the attention surrounding Emma's project also attracted notice from students who viewed academic achievement through a very different lens. For Tyler Morrison, Jake Sullivan, and Connor Walsh, excellence that came from effort rather than entitlement represented a fundamental threat to their understanding of how the world operated. These three young men had grown up believing that success was their birthright, that superior outcomes naturally flowed from superior breeding and circumstances. The idea that a scholarship student could outperform them through nothing more than intelligence and hard work challenged the very foundation of their worldview. Tyler Morrison, in particular, felt threatened by Emma's achievements. As the son of Morrison Technologies CEO Robert Morrison, Tyler had always been assured that his future success was guaranteed through family connections and inherited wealth. His academic performance at Westfield was mediocre at best, sustained through expensive tutoring and the subtle pressure his family's donations placed on faculty members to maintain his grades at acceptable levels. Tyler's own science fair project, a rudimentary investigation into solar panel efficiency that he had largely outsourced to a paid researcher, paled in comparison to Emma's sophisticated bacterial research. The contrast between their work made Tyler's inadequacies impossible to ignore, generating a resentment that grew stronger with each day. Jake Sullivan brought his own set of insecurities to the group dynamic. His father, Judge Patricia Sullivan, had built a reputation as a tough-on-crime jurist who specialized in white-collar criminal cases. Jake lived in constant fear that his academic mediocrity would somehow reflect poorly on his mother's professional reputation or limit his access to the legal career that had been mapped out for him since childhood. Emma's success highlighted his own intellectual limitations in ways that expensive test preparation courses and private tutors couldn't address. The fact that she achieved superior results without the advantages he took for granted generated a cognitive dissonance that he resolved through increasingly hostile behavior. Connor Walsh completed the trio with his own brand of entitled resentment. As the son of pharmaceutical executive Dr. Margaret Walsh, Connor had grown up surrounded by discussions of medical research and scientific advancement. His mother's company, Walsh Pharmaceuticals, held patents on several important medications and maintained research facilities that employed hundreds of scientists with advanced degrees. Connor's inability to demonstrate even basic competency in scientific subjects, despite this privileged exposure, became a source of family tension that he displaced onto targets like Emma, whose natural ability made his failures more obvious. The harassment had begun subtly, with small acts of sabotage that could easily be attributed to accidents or misunderstandings. Emma's laboratory notebooks would mysteriously disappear, forcing her to recreate days of detailed observations from memory. Equipment she had reserved would be reassigned to other students without explanation, disrupting her carefully planned experimental timeline. Chemicals would be mislabeled or contaminated, causing experiments to fail in ways that suggested procedural errors rather than deliberate interference. As Emma's project gained recognition and praise from faculty members, the sabotage escalated in both frequency and sophistication. Tyler and his associates began conducting surveillance of Emma's work schedule, timing their interference to cause maximum disruption while maintaining plausible deniability. They learned which experiments were most critical to her research timeline and targeted those specifically, causing setbacks that forced Emma to work even longer hours to maintain her progress. The psychological pressure was as damaging as the practical interference, creating an atmosphere of constant vigilance that exhausted Emma's emotional resources. The turning point came when Dr. Richardson announced that Emma's project had been selected to represent Westfield at the Regional Science Fair, with the winner advancing to state competition and potentially national recognition. This announcement transformed what had been casual harassment into a focused campaign of destruction. Tyler realized that Emma's continued success would not only highlight his own inadequacies, but also potentially provide her with opportunities and recognition that he believed should belong to students of his social standing. The idea that a scholarship student might achieve national recognition while representing Westfield Preparatory Academy was intolerable to someone who viewed the school as his personal domain. The final assault on Emma's project was planned with military precision, timed to occur during the lunch period when the science laboratories would be largely empty, but not completely deserted. Tyler, Jake, and Connor had observed Emma's routine for weeks, noting that she typically spent lunch periods in the library rather than the cafeteria, avoiding the social dynamics that reminded her of her outsider status. They knew that her absence would provide a window of opportunity to destroy her work while ensuring that other students would witness their actions, sending a clear message about the consequences of challenging their authority. Emma's bacterial cultures represented months of careful cultivation, with some specimens requiring specific temperature and nutrient conditions that took weeks to establish. The microscope she used for detailed observations was a precision instrument worth thousands of dollars, calibrated specifically for the magnification levels her research required. Her research notes, compiled in multiple notebooks with detailed sketches and observations, contained irreplaceable data that existed nowhere else. The destruction of these materials would not only end her current project, but eliminate any possibility of recovering her work or advancing to higher levels of competition. The three boys entered the laboratory during the busy lunch period, when hallway traffic would mask their presence and the sounds of their destruction would be muffled by the general noise of student activity. They had prepared their attack carefully, bringing tools that would maximize damage while allowing them to claim that any destruction was accidental. Tyler carried a baseball from his gym bag, ostensibly innocent, but perfect for creating the kind of impact damage that would shatter delicate equipment. Jake brought a container of bleach solution from the janitor's supply room, knowing that the chemical would destroy bacterial cultures instantly and permanently. Connor contributed his knowledge of laboratory procedures, identifying which elements of Emma's setup were most vulnerable to seemingly accidental damage. The attack unfolded with devastating efficiency. Tyler's first swing of the baseball shattered the microscope's objective lens, sending fragments of precision ground glass across the laboratory bench. Jake's bleach solution swept across Emma's bacterial cultures, destroying weeks of careful cultivation in seconds as the harsh chemical sterilized every surface it touched. Connor methodically tore pages from Emma's research notebooks, shredding months of detailed observations into confetti that fluttered to the floor like destroyed dreams. The entire assault lasted less than 3 minutes, but the damage was comprehensive and irreversible. Emma discovered the destruction when she returned from the library. Her lunch barely touched as usual due to the nervous energy that accompanied her intense focus on the upcoming competition. The sight that greeted her in the laboratory was devastating. In its thoroughness, every aspect of her project that could be destroyed had been systematically eliminated, leaving only twisted metal, broken glass, and the acrid smell of bleach hanging in the air. The months of careful work, the breakthrough discoveries, the hope for recognition and advancement, all of it lay in ruins across the laboratory floor. The immediate aftermath was surreal, with Emma standing motionless among the wreckage as her mind struggled to process the magnitude of the loss. Dr. Richardson arrived minutes later, drawn by reports of noise and commotion from the science wing. Her reaction was one of horror and disbelief, not just at the destruction itself, but at the calculated cruelty it represented. This wasn't random vandalism or accidental damage. It was a targeted assault designed to destroy not just Emma's work, but her spirit and her future opportunities. Tyler, Jake, and Connor remained in the laboratory, their presence a clear statement of ownership and impunity. They made no attempt to hide their involvement or express sympathy for the destruction they had caused. Instead, they maintained the same smug satisfaction that had characterized their harassment campaign from the beginning, confident that their social position would protect them from any meaningful consequences. Their casual dismissal of Emma's devastation revealed the depth of their entitlement and their complete lack of empathy for anyone outside their privileged circle. Dr. Richardson's attempts to document the crime scene were hampered by the extensive nature of the damage and the contamination caused by the bleach solution. The bacterial cultures that represented Emma's most significant discoveries were beyond recovery, their genetic material destroyed by the harsh chemical treatment. The microscope, while potentially repairable, would require weeks of recalibration and adjustment that would extend far beyond the science fair deadline. Most tragically, the torn research notebooks contained observations and insights that existed nowhere else, representing intellectual property that could never be recovered or reconstructed. The emotional impact on Emma was profound and immediate. The project hadn't just been a school assignment or even a competition entry. It had been her pathway to demonstrating that excellence could transcend circumstance, that intelligence and hard work could compete with privilege and connections. The destruction represented more than vandalism. It was an assault on her identity as a scientist and her hopes for the future. The boys hadn't just destroyed her experiment. They had attempted to destroy her dreams and her sense of self-worth. Word of the destruction spread quickly through Westfield's halls, carried by students who had witnessed the aftermath and faculty members who recognized the significance of what had been lost. The response from Emma's classmates varied dramatically based on their social position and relationship to the perpetrators. Students from privileged backgrounds generally maintained a studied silence, unwilling to criticize Tyler and his associates for fear of becoming targets themselves. Scholarship students and others on the social periphery expressed outrage and sympathy, but their voices carried little weight in Westfield's carefully stratified social hierarchy. The administration's initial response was disappointingly predictable, focusing more on damage control and institutional reputation than on justice for Emma or consequences for the perpetrators. Principal Catherine Hartwell, a career educator who had spent 15 years navigating the delicate politics of elite private education, immediately began calculating the potential ramifications of any decisive action. Tyler's father was a major donor whose technology company had funded the school's recent computer lab renovation. Jake's mother sat on the county judicial bench and had connections throughout the state legal system. Connor's family pharmaceutical company had endowed the very science laboratory where the destruction had occurred. These financial and political considerations created a complex web of interests that made meaningful accountability unlikely through traditional channels. Principal Hartwell's primary concern was maintaining the school's reputation and ensuring continued financial support from influential families, goals that were best served by minimizing the incident and avoiding actions that might be perceived as targeting prominent students. The institutional response that followed would be characterized by investigation without resolution, concern without commitment, and sympathy without justice. Emma found herself in the devastating position of being the victim of a crime that everyone acknowledged but no one seemed willing to address meaningfully. The destruction of her project was undeniable, the perpetrators were obvious, and the impact was catastrophic, yet the machinery of institutional protection began operating immediately to shield Tyler, Jake, and Connor from serious consequences. The message was clear: at Westfield Preparatory Academy, social position trumped academic achievement, and privilege provided immunity from accountability. The days following the destruction were among the darkest in Emma's young life. The project that had consumed her thoughts and energy for months was gone, leaving her feeling directionless and defeated. The competition deadline made starting over impossible, even if the resources and materials had been available. More crushing than the immediate loss was the realization that her attackers had been correct in their assessment of their own impunity. They had destroyed her work with confidence because they understood the system better than she did. Dr. Richardson became Emma's strongest advocate during this period, recognizing that the attack on her project represented an assault on the principles of academic excellence and scientific inquiry that were supposed to define Westfield's educational mission. She began documenting every aspect of the incident, photographing the damage, collecting witness statements, and preparing a comprehensive report that would make institutional inaction difficult to justify. Her experience as an educator had taught her that injustice flourished in environments where good people remained silent, and she was determined not to let Emma's victimization go unchallenged. The response from Emma's parents was immediate and intense, though constrained by their understanding of the political realities surrounding elite private education. David Chen's experience as an FBI agent had taught him to recognize institutional corruption and the ways that wealth and influence could subvert justice. His initial instinct was to pursue criminal charges against the boys who had destroyed his daughter's work, but he understood that such action would likely result in Emma's expulsion and the end of her educational opportunities at Westfield. The scholarship that had seemed like such a blessing was now revealed as a chain that bound them to accepting injustice in exchange for access. Sarah Chen's reaction was equally frustrated, her medical training making her particularly sensitive to the loss of scientific research and the waste of intellectual potential. She had seen Emma's dedication to the project, the long hours spent refining techniques and analyzing results, the genuine excitement that came from making discoveries and contributing to human knowledge. The casual destruction of months of careful work represented not just an attack on her daughter, but an assault on the scientific process itself, a rejection of the values that should have been sacred in an academic environment. The family meetings that followed were painful exercises in weighing impossible choices and accepting unacceptable realities. Emma wanted justice, accountability, and recognition of the wrong that had been done to her. Her parents wanted to protect her future opportunities while somehow addressing the injustice she had suffered. The competing priorities seemed irreconcilable within the constraints of Westfield's power structure and the political realities that governed elite educational institutions. As Emma sat in the destroyed laboratory that had once represented her greatest opportunity, surrounded by the debris of her shattered dreams, she began to understand that the real education she was receiving at Westfield had nothing to do with academic subjects or scientific research. She was learning about power and privilege, about how institutions protect those who matter and sacrifice those who don't, about the way that excellence could be crushed by mediocrity when mediocrity had enough money and influence to defend itself. The three boys who had destroyed her project continued attending classes, participating in activities, and enjoying the privileges of their social position as if nothing had happened. Their confidence in their immunity was not misplaced. It was based on a lifetime of experience that had taught them that consequences were for other people, that their family's wealth and status provided protection from accountability that was absolute and unshakable. They had destroyed Emma's project not just because they could, but because they knew they would face no meaningful repercussions for doing so. This knowledge was perhaps more devastating to Emma than the destruction itself, because it revealed the true nature of the world she was trying to enter. Excellence wasn't enough. Intelligence wasn't sufficient. Hard work and dedication were meaningless if they weren't accompanied by the right family connections and financial resources. The meritocracy she had believed in was an illusion, a story told to scholarship students to keep them motivated while ensuring they never truly threatened the established order. Yet even in her darkest moments, Emma began to sense that this assault on her dreams might catalyze something larger than a destroyed science project. Her father's work with the FBI had taught him that injustice often created the very evidence needed to expose and defeat corruption. That overconfidence and impunity led to mistakes that ultimately brought down those who believed themselves untouchable. The boys who had destroyed her project had revealed their true nature and their methods, providing insight into a system of privilege and protection that operated in the shadows of elite institutions. The stage was set for a confrontation that would extend far beyond a high school science fair, beyond the walls of Westfield Preparatory Academy, and beyond the comfortable assumption that wealth and status provided immunity from consequences. Emma's education was about to take a dramatic turn, one that would teach her lessons about justice, power, and the unexpected ways that truth could triumph over privilege when the right circumstances aligned. The destroyed laboratory lay silent. Around her, glass fragments catching the afternoon light like scattered diamonds, the acrid smell of bleach, a constant reminder of deliberate cruelty. But in that silence, something new was beginning to form, not just anger or resentment, but a deeper understanding of how systems operated and how they might be challenged. The real story was just beginning, and it would prove that sometimes the greatest discoveries came not from successful experiments, but from understanding how and why those experiments were destroyed. Emma stared at her phone screen for the third time that evening, her finger hovering over her father's contact number. The weight of the decision pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden, each second of hesitation representing another moment of accepting injustice. For 2 weeks since the destruction of her project, she had watched Tyler, Jake, and Connor move through Westfield's halls with the same arrogant confidence they had always displayed. Their immunity apparently absolute and unshakable. Principle. Hartwell's investigation had produced exactly the outcome everyone had predicted. Inconclusive findings, insufficient evidence, and a gentle reminder that false accusations could have serious consequences for scholarship students. The breaking point came during Thursday morning's advanced biology class when Dr. Richardson announced the regional science fair winners. Emma sat in the back row, trying to make herself invisible while listening to the names of students whose projects would advance to state competition. When Tyler Morrison's name was called for his solar panel efficiency study, the project Emma knew he had barely touched, the injustice became unbearable. The polite applause from her classmates felt like needles against her skin, each clap. Reminder that mediocrity protected by privilege would always triumph over excellence undermined by circumstances. That afternoon, Emma finally made the call that would change everything. Agent David Chen was reviewing case files in his Hartford field office when his daughter's name appeared on his caller ID, unusual for a weekday when she should have been in class or studying. The tremor in Emma's voice when she said hello immediately shifted his attention from federal investigations to family crisis, his parental instincts recognizing distress that went beyond typical teenage problems. Emma's recounting of the past 2 weeks was methodical and precise, her scientific training evident in the way she presented facts without emotional embellishment. She described the months of research, the breakthrough discoveries about antibiotic-resistant bacteria, the systematic harassment that had culminated in the destruction of her work. She explained Principal Hartwell's investigation and its predetermined conclusion, the way Tyler and his associates had been protected by their family's influence, the message that had been sent to every scholarship student about their place in Westfield's hierarchy. David Chen listened without interruption, his FBI training helping him recognize patterns of institutional corruption that extended far beyond a high school science project. The calculated nature of the harassment, the systematic protection of the perpetrators, the way the administration had managed the aftermath to minimize consequences for influential families, all suggested a culture of impunity that likely extended to other areas of the school's operations. His daughter's case wasn't just about bullying. It was about systemic corruption that used wealth and influence to subvert justice and accountability. The conversation that followed was unlike any father-daughter discussion they had ever had. David explained to Emma that her attackers had made a critical error in their assessment of their own immunity. While their family's local influence might protect them from school discipline or even local law enforcement, they had crossed lines that brought their actions under federal jurisdiction. The destruction of scientific research, particularly research with potential public health implications, could constitute interference with interstate commerce and academic freedom. More significantly, the pattern of institutional cover-up suggested possible violations of civil rights laws designed to protect students from discrimination. Emma's bacterial research, David realized, represented more than a high school project. It was legitimate scientific inquiry that had potential implications for public health policy and medical treatment. The deliberate destruction of such research could be prosecuted under federal statutes designed to protect scientific freedom and prevent interference with academic investigation. The fact that the destruction had been motivated by social and economic discrimination against a scholarship student added civil rights dimensions that federal prosecutors took very seriously. The plan that emerged from their conversation was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential impact. David would not intervene directly, which could compromise his professional standing and create conflicts of interest. Instead, he would provide Emma with the knowledge and resources she needed to document federal crimes and civil rights violations that were occurring at Westfield. The key was understanding that Tyler, Jake, and Connor were not just bullies. They were criminals whose actions had crossed from local harassment into federal territory. Emma's transformation from victim to investigator began immediately. Using techniques her father had taught her during casual conversations about his work, she started documenting everything with the precision of a federal agent building a case. Every interaction with Tyler and his associates was recorded when legally permissible. Every instance of administrative bias was photographed and time-stamped. Every example of institutional protection was cataloged with the meticulous attention to detail that would be required for federal prosecution. The first breakthrough came when Emma discovered that Tyler's family company, Morrison Technologies, held federal contracts worth millions of dollars, making Tyler himself subject to federal oversight in ways his family had never considered. His harassment of a scholarship student could be interpreted as interfering with federally protected educational opportunities, violations that carried serious criminal penalties and could jeopardize his family's government contracts. The casual cruelty that Tyler had always considered his birthright suddenly became evidence of federal crimes, with consequences that even his family's wealth couldn't eliminate. Emma's investigation expanded beyond her own victimization to uncover a pattern of abuse that had been occurring at Westfield for years. Other scholarship students came forward with stories of harassment, academic sabotage, and institutional indifference that revealed a systematic campaign to discourage diversity and maintain the school's exclusive character. Each testimony added weight to the federal case that was building, transforming individual incidents into evidence of conspiracy and civil rights violations. The second phase of Emma's plan involved rebuilding her destroyed research using backup materials her father helped her access through his federal contacts. The bacterial samples that Tyler had destroyed with bleach were irreplaceable, but the underlying research methodology could be reconstructed and improved using resources from government laboratories that David's position allowed him to arrange. Emma's new project would be even more sophisticated than her original work, with implications that reached beyond state science fairs into genuine scientific contribution. Tyler Morrison remained oblivious to the investigation that was building around him, his confidence in his immunity preventing him from recognizing the evidence that Emma was collecting. His continued harassment of scholarship students provided additional documentation of civil rights violations, while his family's federal contracts created vulnerability that he had never imagined. The boy who had destroyed Emma's project because He believed himself untouchable, was creating the very evidence that would ultimately destroy his family's business empire and his own future prospects. Jake Sullivan's judicial connections, which he had always considered his greatest protection, became his greatest liability when Emma's investigation revealed that his mother, Judge Patricia Sullivan, had been dismissing cases involving Westfield students with suspicious frequency. The pattern of judicial favoritism that Emma documented suggested corruption that federal prosecutors would find irresistible, particularly when combined with evidence of her son's criminal behavior. The judge who had built her reputation on being tough on crime was about to discover that federal oversight applied to her courtroom as well as everyone else's. Connor Walsh's pharmaceutical family background provided the most devastating evidence of all when Emma's investigation revealed that Walsh Pharmaceuticals had been conducting unauthorized medical research using Westfield students as unknowing test subjects. The bacterial strains that Emma had discovered in her original research weren't just evidence of international travel. They were indicators of human experimentation that violated every medical ethics standard and numerous federal laws. Connor's casual destruction of Emma's research had inadvertently prevented her from discovering evidence that would have destroyed his family's company and landed his mother in federal prison. The climax of Emma's investigation came during Westfield's annual donor gala, a black-tie event where the school's most influential families gathered to celebrate their generosity and social prominence. Emma had been excluded from the event. Of course, her scholarship status making her unsuitable for such elite company. However, her father's federal credentials provided access that none of the attendees had anticipated, and the evidence she had collected over the past month provided grounds for federal intervention that would shock the assembled gathering. Agent David Chen's arrival at the donor gala was understated but unmistakable, his federal badge and accompanying team of investigators creating a silence that spread through the elegant ballroom like ripples on a disturbed pond. The parents who had spent the evening congratulating themselves on their success and influence suddenly found themselves facing federal agents with arrest warrants and seizure orders that their local connections couldn't influence or prevent. Tyler Morrison's father was arrested first, charged with federal contract fraud and conspiracy to interfere with educational opportunities. The evidence that Emma had collected demonstrated that Morrison Technologies had been using its federal contracts to funnel money into Westfield for the specific purpose of maintaining its exclusive character and preventing diversity initiatives. The millions of dollars in government contracts that had funded the family's lifestyle would be frozen pending investigation, and Robert Morrison would face federal prison time that no amount of local influence could reduce. Judge Patricia Sullivan's arrest followed immediately, federal marshals taking her into custody on charges of judicial corruption and civil rights violations. The pattern of dismissed cases involving Westfield students that Emma had documented provided clear evidence of a conspiracy to deny equal justice under law, violations that carried mandatory prison sentences, and the loss of her judicial position. The judge who had spent her career sending others to prison would now experience the system from the other side, with no possibility of the favoritism she had shown to others. Dr. Margaret Walsh's arrest was the most dramatic. Federal agents seizing her company's research facilities while charging her with human experimentation and medical fraud. The bacterial strains that Emma had identified in her original research provided evidence of unauthorized medical testing that violated international law as well as domestic regulations. Walsh Pharmaceuticals would be dissolved, its assets forfeited to compensate victims of illegal experimentation, and Dr. Walsh would face life imprisonment for crimes against humanity. The three boys who had destroyed Emma's project watched their parents being led away in handcuffs, their own futures collapsing as rapidly as their families' fortunes. Tyler, Jake, and Connor were charged as juveniles with conspiracy to violate civil rights, but they would be tried in federal court where their ages provided no protection from serious consequences. The casual cruelty that had seemed so entertaining, when directed at scholarship students, suddenly carried the weight of federal prison sentences that would define the rest of their lives. Principal Catherine Hartwell's administrative career ended that evening when federal agents presented evidence that she had been actively participating in the conspiracy to maintain Westfield's discriminatory practices. Her careful management of incidents involving scholarship students wasn't administrative discretion. It was criminal conspiracy to deny civil rights, charges that carried both prison time and the permanent loss of her educational credentials. The woman who had built her career on protecting institutional reputation discovered that some reputations weren't worth protecting. Emma watched the evening's events unfold from her family's modest home, following news reports that described the arrests and charges that had emerged from her patient investigation. The scholarship student who had been dismissed as powerless had used federal law and systematic documentation to bring down a network of corruption that had operated with impunity for decades. Her destroyed science project had been the catalyst for justice that reached far beyond her individual case, protecting future students from the systematic abuse she had endured. The aftermath of the federal investigation transformed Westfield Preparatory Academy completely. Federal oversight, ensuring that discriminatory practices would be eliminated and scholarship students would receive equal treatment. Emma's bacterial research was published in professional journals with acknowledgement of the circumstances that had nearly prevented its completion. Her work contributing to public health initiatives that saved lives across the country. The project that Tyler had destroyed in a few minutes of casual cruelty became the foundation for a career in scientific research that exceeded Emma's most ambitious dreams. The three families that had seemed so powerful just months earlier were left devastated by the federal prosecution that had emerged from their children's actions. Morrison Technologies lost all federal contracts and declared bankruptcy within 6 months, the family fortune evaporating as quickly as their political influence. Judge Sullivan served 8 years in federal prison. Her judicial pension forfeited and her legal career permanently ended. Dr. Walsh received a life sentence for her medical crimes. Her pharmaceutical empire dissolved to provide restitution for victims of illegal experimentation. Tyler, Jake, and Connor each received federal sentences that reflected the seriousness of their civil rights violations, their privileged backgrounds providing no protection from the consequences of their criminal behavior. The boys who had believed themselves untouchable discovered that federal law applied equally to everyone, regardless of family wealth or social position. Their casual destruction of Emma's project had set in motion events that destroyed not only their own futures but their families' legacies as well. Emma Chen graduated from Westfield as valedictorian, her academic achievements finally receiving the recognition they deserved in an environment where merit trumped social position. Her acceptance to Harvard University came with a full scholarship and research opportunities that positioned her for a career in scientific investigation that would benefit society for decades. The girl who had been told to know her place had instead used intelligence, courage, and federal law to redefine what places were available to people willing to fight for justice. Dr. Richardson was promoted to principal of the transformed Westfield Academy, her commitment to academic excellence and student protection, making her the ideal leader for an institution, learning to value merit over money. Her first act was establishing the Emma Chen Science Research Center, a facility dedicated to ensuring that no student's work would ever again be destroyed by those who felt threatened by excellence they couldn't match. Agent David Chen received commendations for his role in exposing the corruption at Westfield, his ability to guide his daughter's investigation, while maintaining professional ethics, setting a standard for federal agents facing similar situations. The case became a model for federal intervention in institutional discrimination, providing precedents that protected students across the country from the kind of systematic abuse that had nearly destroyed Emma's dreams. The story of Emma's triumph spread far beyond Connecticut, inspiring scholarship students and underprivileged youth to understand that intelligence and determination could overcome even the most entrenched systems of privilege and corruption. Her example proved that excellence didn't require wealth or connections, only the courage to pursue truth regardless of the obstacles placed in its way. Years later, Dr. Emma Chen would look back on the destruction of her high school science project as the moment that truly began her education, not in biology or chemistry, but in the ways that justice could triumph over injustice when good people refused to accept corruption as inevitable. The bacterial cultures that Tyler had destroyed with casual cruelty had been replaced by something far more powerful: a commitment to fighting systematic abuse wherever it occurred, using the tools of law and investigation to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.